Isaac Newton was one of the most educated people of his time. And he didn't just write about science books, he also wrote about history. Now, something interesting is that he writes about how the Phoenicians and all these other people got literature. But let's see what he says personally. Now, I have to first state something that Isaac Newton saw the first two groups of people who invented writing as the Ethiopians and the Egyptians. As we read, as the Egyptians, Phoenicians, and Syrians in those days defied their kings and princes, so upon their coming into Asia Minor and Greece, they taught those nations to do like that. As hath been showed above, in those days the writing of the Thebans, Thebes is in Egypt, and Ethiopians was in hieroglyphics, and this way of writing seems to have spread into the lower Egypt before the days of Moses, for thence came the worship of their gods in the various shapes of birds, beasts, and fishes. Fishes forbidden in the second commandment. Now, this emblematic way of writing gave occasion to the Thebans and Ethiopians, who in the days of Samuel, David, Solomon, and Rehoboam conquered Egypt and the nations round about and erected a great empire to represent and signify their conquering kings and princes, not by writing down their names, but by marking various hieroglyphic figures, as by painting Ammon with ram's horns to signify the king who conquered Libya, a country abounding with sheep. Though Isaac Newton was a deep Christian, he wasn't entirely incorrect about what he's saying, but he also gives other people's perspectives. For example, he writes, Homer places Thebes in Ethiopia, and the Ethiopians reported that the Egyptians were a colony drawn out of them by Osiris, and that thence it came to pass that most of the laws of Egypt were the same with those of Ethiopia, and that the Egyptians learned from the Ethiopians the customs of deifying their kings. All this, by the way, is in the book by Isaac Newton called The Chronology of Ancient Kingdoms, amended. This is to prove that it wasn't just a small amount of people who believed that the ancient Egyptians were Ethiopians, but in fact, it was people the world around, from the Muslims, the Chinese, the Indians, and the Europeans themselves, thought that the Egyptians were just a spread from Ethiopians. Ethiopians, by the way, meaning Sudanese, people from Ethiopia straight today, people from all these other places which are in the east. Now, we shall see that there's too much evidence for this, by the way, to show that if you were to place the ancient Egyptians in a location, right? So if you were to divide Africa into small locations, not just the normal south, west, east, whatever, but if you did, the Egyptians seem to fall nicely or neatly into East Africans and would probably represented by East Africans, not just in literature, not just in history, but in morphology, in culture, in the way they see themselves, in the way they see their gods, and all of that. And not only that, those places were more accepting of the gods of Egypt when they returned back. And this is probably because they belonged to the same culture anyway. But if you look at the Middle East seems to be more open to the religions of the Sumerians. Why is this? The reason is because the people in the Middle East, the Semitics, were more interested or more culturally intertwined for thousands of years with the Sumerians. And that's why most of their gods, if you go all the way back, you'll notice that it all boils down to the Sumerian texts. It's only when we get to about Jesus and people like that that we see a full sort of mixture between the Egyptians and the Sumerian texts, or even Akkadian texts. But even there, they can't get rid of the fact that they're talking about Semitic people. Okay, so fine. We have the ancient Egyptians, the Muslims, and the other people saying that the ancient Egyptians are related to Ethiopians. But what the hell do the Ethiopians or the Egyptians say themselves? You should ask them. What do they say? We know that they would not give credit to people who didn't start what they did. And if they did, then they're stupid. But let's look at who they gave credit to. So let's first read on Wikipedia, then we'll go read a real text. At times, the ancient Egyptians called Punt meaning God's land. This referred to the fact that it was among the regions of the sun god, that is, the regions located in the direction of the sunrise to the east of Egypt. These eastern regions resourced including products used in temples, notably incense. Older literature maintained that the label God's land, when interpreted as Holy Land or land of the gods' ancestors, meant that the ancient Egyptians viewed the land of Punt as their ancestral homeland. Now, let's go read their literature and see if this place that they consider their ancestral homeland, let's go read where they place it. What I'm about to read you is not a fictional story. It's not something that is something that they made up so that they can have a cool story. This came from a king. And so it says, the king's own seal, year 2, third month of the first season, day 15, the king's decree to the sole companion, lector priest, chief of scouts, Harkhuf, notice has been taken of this dispatch of yours, which you made for the king at the palace, to let one know that you have come down in safety from Yam with the army that was with you. You have said in your dispatch of yours that you have brought all kinds of great and beautiful gifts, with Hathor, mistress of Imau, has given to the car of King Neferkare, who lives forever. You have said in this dispatch of yours that you have brought a pygmy of the gods' dancers from the land of the horizon dwellers, l- like the pygmy whom the gods' seal bearer be awarded brought from Punt in the time of King Isesi. So we have two indicators here. One, he calls the pygmy that is going to do the dance of the gods land or whatever. So they're clearly making a similarity between gods and the area where they fetch the pygmies. But then secondly, beyond this, they make a similarity between the borderlands, which, by the way, this is about Nubia. This is as far down as they go into Nubia, and Punt. Punt is most likely in Somalia, but we'll see that it's even worse than this, that they actually say that it's somewhere in Africa, probably Somalia, if we read the next page. So he says, come north to the residence at once. Hurry and bring with you this pygmy, whom you brought from the land of the horizon dwellers. Live, hale, and healthy for the dances of the god, to gladden the heart, to delight the heart of the king Neferkari, who lives forever. When he goes down with you into the ship, get worthy men to be around him on the deck, lest he fall into the water when he lies down at night. Get worthy men to lie around him in his tent. Inspect 10 times at night. My majesty desires to see this pygmy more than the gifts of the mainland and of Punt. When you arrive at the residence and this pygmy is with you, live hale and healthy. My majesty will do great things for you, more than was done for the god's seal bearer bewarded in the times of King Assesi. In accordance with my majesty wish to see this pygmy. Now, I want you to think about how deeply he wants to see this pygmy in terms of uh just think about it for a second. Like, why is this guy dying to see this pygmy? Not to mention that pygmies are associated with um gold smelting, they're associated with a specific god, they're associated with the godlings, they're associated with all these things. This is another one of those associations with Africa. And they have an awareness of Africa, and so they push it down into their culture. Think about how desperately this guy is trying to bring back a pygmy. Of all the people in the world, you have the Nubians right there who are dark skinned and tall. You have Asiatics, you have Europeans, you have whoever the hell. But the one that he wants to see is a pygmy, a dark skinned pygmy black man. Why? And keep in mind why how that he doesn't care about his skin color. He cares more about his height. The rock stela of Mentuhotep, which now we're talking about somebody completely different, but the rock stela of Mentuhotep the fourth, we can see over here it writes primordial first ranking in the land of the horizon dwellers, God's palace endowed with life, divine nest of Horus, in which this God flourishes, his pure place of heart's content set above the deserts of God's land. So already we're getting uh information about the fact that he's talking about the areas south of Egypt. But let's keep reading. First ranking of enduring monuments, beneficent God, Lord of joy, great of fear, rich in love, heir of Horus in the two lands, nursling of divine Isis, mother of men, great magicians. Okay, then let's just read the notes. As the note says, Horus was often identified with men. Like the term land of the horizon dwellers, the expression God's land designated the foreign regions to the east and south of Egypt, including the land of Punt. The meaning of PRW, para, and WBW is uncertain. See Sahankel Memphis for citation for discussion of the term. Lord of Life was a metaphor of sarcophagus. In Iwantanwa equals bowman, designating the people of the southern east desert and of Nubia. Now, two things are being made here, two associations are being made here. The Nubians are being associated with the people of Punt as well. And not only that, they're associating Horus with that land. So in order to prove that, you would have to show that the people in Punt cared a lot about Horus. And here you go. Hur, who is akin to the ancient Egyptian Horus in Somali society. This is especially in Proto-Sabaean Somalia. In other words, until 1000 BC, but then the culture kept going with it. And I think the reason why it's the land of Horus, you can see, is because Horus is one of those gods that they could identify the ancient Egyptians with this region and realize that they worship the same one. And the Sabaeans, by the way, that's when Queen of Sheba comes along and all this other stuff in Ethiopia. Whether it's the Queen of Sheba itself, we don't know, but we do know that people from Lebanon from about 1000 BC came into Ethiopia, Somalia, and the people of Somalia and Ethiopia kind of embrace this reality. But like I said, we can see here that Hur or Horus was already in the proto Somali culture, which is not surprising because it's consistent with the Egyptians, consistent with what Isaac Newton said, consistent with what the Muslims say. And again, we need more DNA tests, but I think the DNA tests are going to eventually start showing the truth when they stop, being so selective about who they genetically test.